Welcome to For Better or For Court, Family Law in New Jersey.
Hello and welcome back to For Better or For Court, Family Law in New Jersey with Ms. Alix Claps. Now, Alix is a partner at Heymann Fletcher, a certified matrimonial law attorney with years of experience guiding clients through divorce, custody, and complex family law matters across New Jersey. I'm Evan Mack, and today we're talking about what happens to the house after a divorce. For many families, the marital home is both their biggest asset and their biggest emotional anchor. So understanding how courts handle it and what options spouses really have is crucial. This is what happens to the house in a divorce. Miss Alix, welcome back.
Good morning, Evan. How are you?
Good morning. I'm well. So let's talk about this. Why does the marital home so frequently become that significant point of contention during divorce, both emotionally and legally as well?
Certainly, your home is your emotional center. So the emotional aspect is real and it's important, and I'm not going to disregard it. Where I am geographically, and even within the state of New Jersey, more specifically, the real estate market has put pressure on family homes and family homes within the context of divorce in a way that I had never seen before recently. So can anybody afford to keep the home, and can anybody afford to move from the home are two giant questions in every divorce case.
So in Jersey, is the marital home always considered a marital asset to be divided by the court?
It depends. So there are ways. It always depends. It always depends. That's I'm gonna get myself a little button that just says it depends. Because the marital home, when I say marital home, I'm talking about the home where the people in the marriage lived, which isn't necessarily, sometimes nobody owns it. Sometimes it's a rental and it's still part of a divorce, even though we're not worried about the equity because we've got leases and we've got other things that we have to deal with. Let's assume for the purpose of this discussion that one or both of the parties owns the home. It may not matter whose name is on the deed. So if it's not a joint deed, what we call joint tenants with right of survivorship, which is how a married couple is put on a deed in New Jersey, it may not matter if only one party is on the deed, depending on how they acquired it and how long they've lived in it as a married couple.
What factors do judges consider, though, when deciding whether one spouse can stay in the home or whether it can be sold or should be sold?
So part of it depends on how the court needs to divide up the equity in the home. And that goes back to when did they acquire it? How long have they lived in it? Let's say they bought it together during the marriage. Then there is a presumption of 50-50 equity. And so we take a look at what is the current fair market value of the home, what is the current mortgage payoff. That's how we figure out what the equity is, and we go from there. If it's a case where one party owned the house premaritally and the other spouse moved in, but let's say that first spouse owned it for 5 years and they lived in it together for 15 years. A lot of the equity that's been gained through sort of market growth was gained during the marriage. Maybe they redid a bathroom. Maybe they redid a kitchen. Maybe they put a new roof on. So they made improvements during the marital life of this house. That grows the equity as well, and that grows the marital equity. So we take a look at what, if any, credit that spouse gets for having owned it before the marriage. On the flip side, if a spouse bought the marital house, let's say even during the marriage, but they used inheritance money to do it, and they bought it maybe a year before the divorce, and they, let's say there's no mortgage. Let's say they bought it for cash with an inheritance, and they've done absolutely nothing to it. They've paid 1 year of property taxes, but nothing else. The court may decide that, that spouse whose inheritance money was used for this, even though, they lived in it as a married couple, they only lived in it an extremely short time, that person should get 95% of the equity.
Wow.
I mean, maybe not 100, but they should get most of it.
So how does the presence of children in the home influence what the court decides, if at all?
That can change the timing. If let's say the court decides that, all right, the marital residence has a 50-50 equity, but neither party can afford to actually live in it by themselves. They can't afford to refinance it. Both of them are going to have to downsize. But you've got a sophomore in high school. The court's going to, and sometimes it's not the court. Sometimes it's we're sitting in a room with a mediator, or we're sitting in a room trying to come up with a solution. And it may make sense to say, all right, we're going to stay, both parties are going to stay on the mortgage and contribute 50-50 to the carrying costs of the home in terms of mortgage and property taxes and homeowners insurance is kind of what we call the carrying costs of the home until this child graduates from high school. Then we'll sell it and we'll split the proceeds. Or one party can eventually take over the house, but right now is a bad time to refinance. So we're going to say that party is going to be solely responsible for the carrying costs of the home, but we're going to freeze that mortgage payoff amount now where that one spouse stopped contributing. And when it's time for us to calculate the equity, we're going to do that based on this number so that the spouse who's continued to pay for the carrying costs of the home and pay down the mortgage balance gets credit for that, but it's not leaving the other spouse out in the cold, because that spouse is, they're going to get, let's say the fair market price of the house goes up $10,000 in that intervening year or two. They're going to get that extra $5,000 because they're basically a real estate investor at that point.
Well, what is the usual process when one spouse wishes to buy out the other share of the other spouse?
So there are two primary questions we have to look at. One is, what's the mortgage payoff amount? What does it take what has to be paid off in order for the house to be refinanced? And again, I'm assuming both parties' names are on the deed or both parties' names are on the mortgage note. And then we have to establish what is the fair market value of the house. That's usually where the disagreements begin, because you can't just go on a website and decide that this is what it is. You have to get either a comparative market analysis, or if you want a really serious piece of documentation, you get a professional real estate appraisal. You pay a professional to say, I'm looking at, they come over, they walk the house, they inspect it, they look at comparable real estate on the market at the time, they take into account the square footage and the condition of the house and all that stuff, and they come up with a fair market value for the house. Now, then you get into the fight of, okay, I'm the spouse that wants to keep the house, so I want to pay out as little as possible to the spouse who's leaving, because I need money. We all need money. So I might make the argument, well, look, this roof is 25 years old. If I were a third party arm's length buyer, I might ask for a new roof before I bought this house. Too bad. That's generally the answer to that, is too bad. You're staying. You're eliminating the risk that comes with being a new buyer. But you're also saving yourself the money that you would pay to a real estate attorney, a title company, to do a refinance, to do a proper closing if you were to sell the house. So everybody, that's kind of where it all works out in the end, because you're saving money in one place, but you're giving up money someplace else.
So what financial challenges should individuals consider if they're determined to keep that house after the divorce?
You've got to be able to afford it, and you've got to be able to convince a bank you can afford it. Right now, a lot of the struggle is we've got clients who may have 2% interest rates or 2.5% interest rates. And if they refinance, it's going to be a 7% interest rate. So their monthly expenses are going to go way up, and they don't want to do that. Some mortgage companies are becoming more flexible with allowing one party to assume the mortgage under its old terms. That's usually ideal, but then you have to be able to afford it yourself. If you're going to refinance, maybe you've got a sibling or a parent or another relative or very good friend who's willing to co-sign the mortgage for you until you can establish the sort of work history. This comes up especially when a spouse had taken time away from the workforce to raise children, or this spouse is going to be receiving alimony, but it hasn't begun yet, and they don't have an alimony history to show to the bank. They might need a third party to co-sign for them.
So, Ms. Alix, besides that monthly mortgage, what legal or maybe financial issues, maybe like the refinancing you talked about, property taxes, equity, do people often overlook?
Sometimes you have to watch out, because if there are judgments against the house in one client's name or the other, that's going to be a problem. They're going to have to be dealt with on a refinance the same way they would if the house were going to be sold. And that can be a whole other marital debt conversation. If one party needs to declare bankruptcy, the marital house is generally exempt from a bankruptcy estate, and that comes with a whole other host of problems too. You got to do kind of due diligence, because it's not just about the house, it's about everything else.
So if neither the spouse can realistically afford to keep the home, what options are available if they decided they both can't, they can't keep the house at all?
They could sell it. The other option is, if they can't afford to keep it, if they wanted to both move and rent it, that still keeps them tied to each other. So that requires a level of trust and a level of amicability that would be unusual. But generally speaking, they have to sell it. And that can be difficult if they don't know where either of them are going. They don't know how far apart they're going to have to live. If they've got kids and they've got a school district to contend with, if the kid's going into kindergarten or the kid's in preschool, that's not such a huge shift, because they're changing dynamics all the time. If you've got a kid in high school who's been in the school district for 10 years, you want to do everything possible to keep them there until they graduate. But there's not a huge rental market out here. I'm in the land of, largely single family homes and townhouses. So finding a place to rent can be a huge problem.
And finally, Miss Alex, what advice would you offer someone who is kind of wrestling with that financial implication of trying to keep a home that they're actually attached to?
Man, there's no one fits all solution. If the house is the most important thing for you, it might be that you make a trade-off somewhere else where you say, I want to keep the home. I need to keep the home. It's important to me, and I need you to give me time to figure out the home. So in exchange for that, I'm not going to take what I'm entitled to from your retirement. There can be trade-offs, especially in a settlement agreement. You can come up with a trade-off if something is that important to you. But as your attorney, I'm going to make sure you know that, all right, now you're putting all of your eggs into the basket of this house, and the house basically is your retirement plan. So if the bottom of the real estate market falls out 20 years from now, when you need to retire, this asset may not cover you in the same way a pension plan would cover you. You're making these decisions. You just want to make sure they're well-informed decisions.
Wow. Ms. Alex, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And thank you all for listening to today's episode of For Better or For Court, Family Law in New Jersey. If you're worried about what will happen to your home in a divorce, Ms. Alex can help you understand your rights and make a plan that works for you and your family. Visit HeymanFletcherLaw.com to schedule that consultation. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review, and share this with someone that might find this information helpful as well. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.